first bill on the calendar for the day is House File 4300. The clerk will report the bill.
House File number 4300, number 1 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to education finance, the third engrossment.
I recognize the author of the bill, the member from Hennepin, Representative Dabney, to explain the bill before going to amendments.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon, members. I want to start, if the Speaker allows, rather than speaking to the bill, speaking to some gratitude for all the folks who stand behind us in creating this bill. Particular thank you goes to our legislative analysts from House Research, Tim Strom and Christina Parra, our fiscal analysts, new on Team Education this year, Solveig Beckel, the reviser, quiet, in the background, does all the hard technical writing work, Cassandra McGinnis, our House Information Specialist, Chris Carpenter, House Writer, Pratik, and of course the partisan staff, who we all work closely with. Wilson Lee, the new, again, someone new on the team, Committee Legislative Assistant, Mars Beltrandi Rudquist, the DFL Caucus Researcher, Sarah Burt, the amazingly able Committee Administrator, and a shout out to Mr. Withers on the GOP side. He's a professional in all ways, and appreciate his participation. Members, the bill we have before us, House File 4300, is a significant proposal to stand up and do our job for the people, the students, and the future of Minnesota. We use the resources that we have as a state to invest. We use the resources we have because for far too long we've made excuses. Oh, we don't have the resources. Oh, we just can't. Well, members, yes, we can. We have the resources. The students and schools of Minnesota are, in fact, the best place that we can invest those resources. House File 4300 starts by paying our bills, by stepping up to our responsibility as the legislature, the responsibility that we have been avoiding. We invest $422 million in the special education cross-subsidy, growing that in the tails so that every school district, we're treating every school district equally, sees a 55% payment of their special education cross-subsidies. And members, I would commend to you one particular run today that you've received in your email that outlines for you the current average special education cost, cross-subsidy cost, and the levy referendums that your districts have to go out and use every year to build, to cover those costs. When you look at those runs, members, you'll find that, not surprisingly, the referendums that your school districts have on their property taxpayers are very close to the cross-subsidy that we have created for those very same students and communities. In fact, the average referendum in Minnesota is $878 per pupil, although some districts have zero. The cross-subsidy, $953 per pupil. Members, to continue, we also propose eliminating the cross-subsidy, the deficit in English language learners. If we're serious about literacy in the state of Minnesota, we have to be serious as Minnesota's schools diversify in making sure that every student has the resources needed for them to learn. We do that in House File 4300. We include the governor's mixed delivery voluntary pre-kindergarten program that Representative Chair Pinto will be speaking to. We also heard loud and clear from school staff, from administrators, from parents, and from students themselves about the increased need for attention to student well-being and mental health. So we develop a dedicated source of revenue for schools to use to hire those school support staff who are so critical in student well-being: counselors, social workers, psychologists, nurses, and chemical dependency counselors. The ability for schools across the state to use this revenue to hire 1,100 of those critical school support staff. The ratio in Minnesota between support staff and students is abysmal. It's time we change that. There are other wraparound services in these bills and efforts, targeted efforts to help students catch up on the delayed learning that they've experienced. Targeted work on literacy, but focused on the student so that they have the supports that they need, and additional funding for Math Corps, because when we look at schools today, we know the delayed learning is greatest in our math learning, and that's a key skill that we need to support. Full-service community schools, grants to schools to support multi-tiered systems of support so we can identify struggling children early, provide them the resources they need, and maybe keep them out of the expensive special education system. There's a lot more to talk about in this bill, and I'm pretty confident we will. But members, we can do this. We can step up to our responsibility as Minnesotans, invest in the students of today and the future of Minnesota tomorrow. I ask for your support. Mr. Chair, back to you.
I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So members, the education bill before us today contains half of the early childhood budget. You will hear the rest of it when we have the HHS bill up shortly. And I want to start, as Chair Davney did, by providing some thanks, in particular to our amazing, amazing nonpartisan staff. And as I referenced, half in this bill, half in the other, these are people, all of whom have to run back and forth between two large and complicated areas. Annie Mock in House Research, who supports us. Doug Berg and Solveig Beckel in House Fiscal, who support us as well. And then the terrific committee staff, Sydney Spreck, committee administrator, Hans Doslin, committee legislative assistant, and then our partisan staff, who, although they are described that way, are both, as Chair Davney said, true professionals. Mars Beltrandi-Rudquist on the DFL side, Jody Withers on the GOP side, both of whom, again, have to be experts in education and in HHS. Amazing. Members, the early childhood provisions in this bill and what you're going to hear in HHS really revolve around this theme of getting kids off to a great start. There is so much in this bill and coming up as well that do that, and really connecting to what you heard from Chair Davney. Members, a couple of key components here. We increase funding for early Head Start by $10 million per year. There is an enormous payoff in Head Start and early Head Start in particular for the youngest kids. And then in particular, we expand early learning scholarships. We hear so much about their power, and we dedicate them to infants and toddlers, more than 20,000 of them receiving early learning scholarships, $150 million this year to get them going, and $45 million per year and a permanent increase to that program. That's infants and toddlers 0 to 3. Once those kids turn 4, our bill would provide a voluntary statewide pre-K program for them to have access to. And I want to make sure that we're clear about who these kids are. These are the lowest income children. These are 200% of poverty or below. That is quite below the state median income. These are kids who are in foster care. They're kids with an incarcerated parent, kids who are homeless or highly mobile. These are the kids who have the least access right now and who would have the biggest payoff. So, as I say, they turn 4, they get access to preschool. I hope we all would recognize the power of the importance of preschool. This is a mixed delivery system. If you have concerns about only having that in the public schools, this is public schools and in Head Starts and in licensed childcare. Families can choose the option that works for them. The thing is, we want to make sure that we have a consistent and clear program with high standards, both for the curriculum that's being provided to kids, for the teachers, and for the whole experience. So there's a consistency. No matter where a child is going, they're going to have a really high quality experience. So that's the plan, right? Kids start off, they get early Head Start, these scholarships, they get preschool, and then a nice connection to kindergarten and success. There are some other components in the bill that I'd like to highlight. We emphasize early childhood social workers. We hear about the mental health crisis for kids in school. I think we're going to be hearing about this, I hope, in the rest of the debate. Major concerns for our K-12 kids. They're really big concerns for the youngest kids, too. So we invest in early childhood social workers. We're allowing our early childhood special education children and our early ELL, English language learner kids, to receive school breakfast. You'd think that they would have been receiving that. Turns out that there was a gap there. They were not. I thank Representative Cagle for bringing that forward. That's in the bill. We have funding for the Minnesota Children's Museum, which has struggled during the pandemic and is especially powerful for those youngest kids. That from Representative Lilly, and I thank him for that. Representative Katiza-Wattoon had a provision for Reach Out and Read. This is a program where your kid goes in the pediatrician. They have books there. It turns out, I've heard this from pediatricians, the most powerful tool that they have, more than the stethoscope, more than anything, is a book. Because they can evaluate what happens with a kid, which way they hold it, turning the pages, and then the kid can take it home and the family can read to the child. Reach Out and Read has a funding increase in this bill and support. And ECFE, Early Childhood Family Education, a real power there. Representative Wolgamott has a provision to provide an office within the Department of Education to support ECFE teachers. They've been asking for that. We want to make sure that they have that. So we have coordination and support all around the state. And then finally, the final piece I want to highlight on that is there's a Grow Your Own Early Childhood Educator program. So make sure that the folks who are perhaps acting as an aide in a child care facility are able to move up and become a lead teacher and get greater skills and be able to support kids. And I want to make sure to highlight that we are reforming the funding in this really fragmented, crazy area. I could list for you 7 or 8 different programs we have to subsidize child care and early learning. We're going to simplify that in the way I said at the start, the Early Head Start, the scholarships, pre-K, and then the connection with kindergarten. Members, there is no greater payoff than in the earliest years. We know that the opportunity gaps that will be referenced throughout this debate begin in those early years. It is so critical we invest in those years. And I want to make sure to highlight for you 2 letters that you have in front of you as the debate continues. We should have plenty of time to discuss them and the importance of investment. I look forward to the discussion. I believe that I'm yielding to Representative Hassan next, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Hassan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and members, I rise today in support of House File 4300, our education bill. This bill responds to the needs of our students and the demands of our educators, who have been tremendously under a lot of challenge in the last few years. I'll let my chairs explain more of the general provisions in this House file. But what I will speak on is the teachers of color, the increased teachers of color and Indigenous teachers in this provision. This bill spends $1.15 billion in total in fiscal year 2023 and $2.12 billion in fiscal year 24 and 25. I want to thank my chair, Chair Richardson, who has been instrumental for fighting for racial justice and equity for our students. I also want to thank Chair Daphne, who just stepped out, who has been a champion for education equity. I also would like to thank Chair Pinto, who cares about our little ones, who wants to make sure that our little ones start at a great start so we don't have problems in high school, so we can fix the problems early on in life. I also want to thank all of our education team and my colleagues, my amazing, amazing colleagues who are all champions for education in the ed policy. This bill responds to our students' needs and our educators' demands to do their job in safe and welcoming environment. We have heard from students who were harassed and discriminated because of their race, religion, and sexual orientations. We had heard from students who were molested, sexually molested, by adults that were supposed to protect them. We had heard from young girls whose hijabs were ripped off on a daily basis with other adults around. Our students came to us and demand that we listen to their needs. Our students cried on the Zoom calls saying that they don't feel safe at their school environment. As we know, children or young people are not going to learn when they're constantly under pressure, when they're constantly feeling unsafe. And this bill responds to many different levels of our students' needs. The teachers of color provisions in this bill are important to me because I believe all students benefit from teachers of color. And the policy provisions in this bill are crucial to ensuring a strong return on our state's investments. The proposed policies in this bill have been vetted and supported by dozens of educators and community organizations over the years. These policies promote system change needed with increased investments that are needed to move the needle forward. And increasing the percentage of teachers of color who reflect increasingly the diverse students that we have across the state. My whole public education has been with passionate educators who some cared and some didn't, but neither understood my culture, nor sometimes cared what I felt about certain issues. I relied on my parents who were educators and my family's support to succeed, but I was one of the lucky ones. Not all students have that caring adult in their life. So we must make sure that our educators are diverse so we can respond to our students' needs. As we know, representation matters. Kids learn best when they are taught by people who understand their communities and life experience, and all students benefit from teachers of color. Our gaps are among the worst in the nation, and they persist. Minnesota continues to have the worst opportunity and achievement gaps in the country, and the severe, persistent, and shortage of teachers of color is a big reason for that. We are in a deep hole. While students of color and Native American students make up about 35% of Minnesota's K-12 student population, only 5.6% of teachers are teachers of color and Indigenous teachers. This is an increase from 2 years ago. That 5.6% is an actual increase from 2 years ago, when we put a historic funding, actually 1 year ago when we did a historic funding for teachers of color. Increased Teachers of Color and American Indian Teachers Act responds to increased call for racial justice. Our students came to our Zoom calls and said, we want teachers that look like us, that understand our experience. And research shows that all students from all racial and ethnic backgrounds benefit from teachers of color, and the economy benefits too. So since we funded last year many of the provisions of teachers of color, this year it's predominantly the policy and few other fundings. The collaborative Urban and Greater Minnesota Indian Educators Grant is in this bill. It increases funding for the program and requires PELSP to award grants based on outcomes, use of research-based to provide programmatic support, my God, outcomes, plans to provide financial support of teacher, candidates, and more. And then Grow Your Own program provides additional funding for the Grow Your Own program in the special revenue to meet the needs and the increased demand for the program. There's also another provision in this bill that's mine, that's the requiring personal finances for graduation requirements for students. This is a direct response from our students' demands. Our students came to us and told us that they do want to have personal finances as a part of their curriculum. Our students deserve a well-rounded education to be ready for the real world. Many of our students are getting out of high school without knowing how to balance a checkbook, how to take loans, how to pay off loans, as well as what the interests are on those loans. So our students deserve to have that education as part of their requirement. We know that algebra is a requirement. Personal finances should also be a requirement because it's something that you're gonna need. We know people who are, from research, people who have, balanced, finances live a longer life, they live a less stressful life, and they have a healthier outcomes as well. As someone who's from, who represent a district that's extremely poor and diverse, and also from, humble background, I see this as a problem everywhere. When I went to college, I didn't know what I was getting myself into, and I thought I was the only one. And I talked to many of my, friends. Poor people and people who don't have a whole lot of money do not talk about money. Talking about money is a privilege. It's something that you learn from your families, but if there isn't enough money to go around, you're not going to talk about money. So that's why I'm advocating that we add personal finances as our graduation requirement. I can stand here all day long and talk about education, but I won't do that. I won't do that to you. I want to thank Representative Lisa Dameth, who has been working with me on issues around LIFO. I know she will talk about this today, but her and I have been trying to figure out a way to retain more teachers of color in the classroom and how to deal with the issues for last in, first one out, and how to protect teachers of color. And our conversation continues, and I will say that we have done great work around that. With that, Mr. Chair, I don't want to say Madam Chair and offend you. Mr. Chair and members, my parents were educators. Both my parents were educators. My father spoke 9 languages. 7 he spoke fluently, and 2 he spoke somewhat. And one of the things he used to tell us was, if I die today, I'm dying, and I'm leaving you guys with education and wisdom. I'm not leaving you with a whole lot of money. He left us with education and wisdom because when the Civil War broke in my country, I was only 7 or 8 years old, and we came to the refugee camp. I don't know if any of you guys have been to a refugee camp. When you go to a refugee camp, there is a 1-month waiting period where you need to get registered. The UNHCR has to, take your fingerprints. They have to verify who you are, whatever. You wait. That period, you get food, but you don't have a whole lot of shelter. You have to figure out a shelter for yourself. My brothers, who were at the time 14, 15, and 16, decided a creative way to make money. They knew English. Most people in the camp did not know English. And as you know, or you don't know, but Kenya, English is the national language. So everyone was interested in learning English. So what they did was, they did this unique project. They were like, okay, we know a lot of people don't have money. We'll teach you English. They had this little space. We'll teach you English. You help us build a hut. We don't know how to build a hut because we're from the city. None of us, including my mother, knew how to do that. And we'll take food for exchange. For that whole month, we survived because my brothers knew English. My brothers had that knowledge that my father said, I'm going to leave you with knowledge. So education is that important to me. Education is the reason why I stand here today. And I want to make sure that everyone can feel good about supporting this bill today because it's a good bill. It helps students with food, so no kid goes hungry. It helps students with mental health. It helps educators with support that they need. And of course, it deals with the special ed subsidy, cross-subsidy, as well as ELL cross-subsidy. With that, Mr. Chair and members, I hope you can support this, and I look forward to the conversation that follows.
I recognize the member from Dakota, Representative Richardson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to start with thanks as well, and I want to thank all the dedicated staff that makes our work possible. And I want to extend special thanks to Sydney Spreck, Isabel Rose, Mars Bachardi-Runquist, and Jody Withers, and nonpartisan staff. I also want to thank Vice Chair Hassan for her hard work and contributions to this bill. I want to thank Representative Erickson for her leadership on our committee and her insight and the perspective that she brought to the committee as well. And I also want to extend gratitude to all members of the committee for their work and for their contributions. Finally, I want to thank Chairs Pinto and Davney as well for their work and their commitment to our kids. Members, the challenges facing our schools today are great. The challenges are complex. There's a need for ongoing work to build a system that truly gives every child an opportunity to thrive and reach their full potential. The policy provisions in this bill represent a step in the right direction, as we work to confront the multiple challenges that we are experiencing in our schools today. In discussion with students, parents, teachers, bus drivers, administrators, and other school staff across the state, we heard some common themes around struggles. We are hearing that the acuity of mental health needs is at an all-time high in our state and in our schools. We've heard the impacts of trauma layered on already stressed school staff and stressed out students have created a perfect storm. In committee, we heard heartbreaking stories of the impact of overdose deaths, deaths by suicide, school shootings, and what we are hearing from our students and what we're hearing from our educators is that our children are not okay. And so many of our school staff are not okay. We have traumatized school staff trying to take care of traumatized students, and they're begging for a lifeline. They're begging for support. And this policy bill takes some steps in the right direction. I want to lift up a few of the provisions. Representative Berg's mental illness training provision that requires school administrators to complete training on mental illness and suicide prevention. She also has provisions around requiring districts and charter schools to communicate the child abuse hotline to students who might be in need. Representative Morrison's bill that gives school districts the ability to maintain a supply of opiate antagonists like Narcan in case of an overdose. Representative Jurgen's provision that encourages school districts to provide substance use misuse instruction for students in grades 6 through 12. Provisions to support the social and emotional learning of students to create a positive school environment and climate that is conducive to learning. Representative Edelson has a bill on special education due process time to address some of the overwhelm our teachers are experiencing, and a provision to remove the prohibition on Tier 1 teachers from joining the bargaining unit. We've heard from our students, parents, and teachers that students are facing recurring and horrific experiences of racism and hate speech in our schools. Many of us have seen the viral stories of students who have been targeted for the color of their skin, their disabilities, their religion, their sexual orientation. In committee, we heard the heartbreaking story of a young second grader who was targeted because of the color of her skin. She was subjected to hateful speech, and she shared the devastating impact of that experience with our committee. We know that these incidences are not isolated within our state. We know that racism in our state is not new. We know now it's just being filmed for all to see. And the way that it has invaded our schools, we cannot ignore the impacts and the trauma of racism on our students. It's a contributor to the mental health crisis. It's a risk factor for suicidal ideation. It's a risk factor for death by suicide. And it's also a risk factor for substance use disorders. If our schools are not welcoming and inclusive spaces for Black, Latinx, Indigenous, and Asian students and school staff, we are not living up to the promise that every student should have the opportunity to thrive and succeed in this state. I want to thank Representative Jess Hansen, for her provision requiring school boards to address malicious and sadistic conduct motivated by a student's disability, race, religion, sexual orientation, and also around sexual harassment and sexual exploitation. This policy bill has also centered the voices of students. I had the opportunity to meet with a diverse group of students from across the state and hear directly from them what they wanted to see in their curriculum. And they talked about the need for financial literacy, civics, and ethnic studies. Vice Chair Hassan has provided leadership on a financial literacy bill. And when teenagers are taught financial literacy, we know they have higher credit scores, they're less likely to be delinquent on debt, and our students deserve that access to financial literacy. Representative Frazier has a provision on ethnic studies, and research tells us the importance of diverse curriculum. In fact, early research has shown that access to a culturally relevant curriculum with students has many promising results. In fact, GPAs increased. There's improved academic performance. improvements in attendance, reductions in truancy, increased probabilities of graduating, and increased likelihood of enrolling in post-secondary options. I also want to highlight Representative Erdahl's provision for civics and appreciate his long-term advocacy to prepare our students for civic life. I also want to lift up Representative Keeler's Indigenous Peoples Day provision, and also the work that has been done by People for PSEO to repeal the post-secondary enrollment gag rule. This policy bill also includes provisions to address the persistent opportunity gap by race in Minnesota. We know that our state currently ranks near the bottom for our education outcomes. That not only hurts our students and our communities, but it hurts our state overall. There are several provisions to move the needle on these unacceptable disparities. Vice Chair Hassan's work around the teacher of color and Indigenous teacher provisions. We know all students do better when they have access to diverse teachers. We also know across the state, the school discipline data shows that Black students, Indigenous students, and students with disabilities do not have an equal opportunity to be in the classroom within our state. We can be sure that we will never close the opportunity gap, the achievement gap, if we do not address these discipline disparities, particularly in the early years in grades K through 3rd grade. We have examples from across the state of Black, Indigenous children and students with disabilities being pushed out of classrooms for nonviolent offenses. We heard in committee stories of a young Black student in kindergarten who was suspended for staying in the bathroom too long. We heard about a young Black girl in kindergarten who was suspended after she ran from a room after a teacher confiscated chapstick from her. We have a disturbing pattern where students with disabilities are receiving more punishment and longer punishment than their peers, than compared with their peers without disabilities. And the same is true for Black and Indigenous students when compared with their white peers. There is no surprise that we see corresponding disparities in literacy rates, math achievement, and graduation rates. If our kids are not in the classroom at the same rate as other kids in grades K through 3rd grade, they're going to be at greater risk for not meeting developmental milestones related to reading and math literacy. Furthermore, the statistics tell us children who are suspended or expelled are 10 times more likely to drop out of high school. And they're also more likely to experience academic failure. And just one suspension means that a child is twice as likely to come in contact with our criminal justice system. This bill will create a fairer discipline process for students and will still allow students to be removed from a class if a student engages in violent behavior or be dismissed if there's a serious safety threat. Members, one bill is not going to address all of the challenges that we are currently facing within the state, but this is a step in the right direction to assure that we are hearing and heeding the call for help that we are hearing from across our state. And with that, I look forward to today's discussion. Thank you, Madam Speaker.